Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to deliver my verdict on the newest Canon lens for its EOS M system, and that is the EF-M 28mm f3.5 macro IS STM. And so, if you haven't already seen, I've done an episode on the build and the features, and I would really encourage you to take a look at that because I'm able to break that down more thoroughly there. This lens has a lot of neat little innovations that make it really actually more interesting in reality than what it may seem on paper, because probably all of us were looking for a longer focal length than 28mm and a wider maximum aperture than f3.5. But I detail in that episode how that really Canon has thrown some innovations into the mix that help to make up for the lens that we were expecting and may not have gotten. But so I would encourage you to take a look at that. The one thing that I do want to add after several more weeks of use since I've done that particular episode is that I do want to break down a couple of things that I have discovered. Number one, you know, if you're like most macro shooters, at some point you're going to want to use some actual manual focus. Now, I do recognize that mirrorless bodies are a little bit more forgiving when it comes to positioning your subject in the frame, and the fact that you really can set your focus pretty much anywhere, and that certainly helps. But at the same time, most serious macro shooters prefer to do some finite control of using the actual manual focus ring. In this case, the one challenge when it comes to that for manual focus is there is no kind of distance markings at all, and so you're just going to have to rely on the visual confirmation from the screen. Not a big deal, but that's just kind of the nature of STM lenses. And then overall, really, I find that for STM, the actual manual focus, if I switch into manual focus mode, the one thing that is a little frustrating sometimes for manual focus with these kind of lenses is that there's a little bit of lag, and so if you're kind of visually watching focus come, sometimes you end up focusing past the point, and then the lens catches up and you realize you focused too far. And so anyway, STM isn't my favorite choice for macro shooting, but that is what it is. And I'm running into the issue, another issue right now that I wanted to highlight, and that is my one major engineering complaint about this lens. As I detailed in the first episode, there's a little switch on the side that allows you to switch the lens from its retracted position. It's a retractable lens to help keep the overall length short, so you have to actually move it into range for shooting. Now, of course, that is a problem if you're trying to catch something really quick. You know, you turn the camera on, it's just that extra step that you've got to turn things on, and then you've got to actually, and the first thing you'll get is a notification, if you haven't already, set the lens to the shooting position, and that will show up on the LCD screen. So you've got to do that, but so you're in a hurry and trying to grab that shot, so you push that switch and you rotate this ring. The one problem is there's not a strong detent for the normal shooting position. It's the normal shooting position that allows you the full range of focus. But as I just did without considering it a moment ago, I slipped right past that because it doesn't grab you there. Instead, I went all the way into the super macro position. Well, the super macro mode only allows you a range of focus of really not even that much. It's only a couple of inches of focus range, and so as a result you basically have to be right on top of your subject for super macro to be effective. When you're in super macro mode and you want to shoot that, that's no problem, but I do wish that Canon had engineered a more definite stop to where you stopped right at the normal shooting range, and then you had to maybe engage the switch a second time, make some kind of more forceful decision to go into super macro mode. I did find that I lost a few shots out in the field with this lens. I traveled with it and used it a lot. I lost a few shots where I was shooting on the fly and I was trying to get focus and frustrated because the lens wasn't focusing, and then come to realize that it was in super macro mode, and so I had to retract the lens back to the regular shooting position, and often by the time I got back there, the moment had passed and I lost the shot. As far as the actual focal length, this is really a great walk-around focal length. Its field of view approximates 44.8, or let's say 45 millimeters, which is pretty much dead on what your eye can perceive. And so it really is the definition of a normal focal length. And so as a result, it just works for a lot of different things. It's one of those kind of Goldilocks focal lengths that seems to be just right for a lot of things. And one thing that I found that as a landscape lens, it really shined. And if I needed wider than that, I did a lot of either vertical or horizontal panoramas that I stitched together and got stunning results that really allowed you to have an incredible amount of resolution. And the fact that this has very low distortion really makes it good for that. And so I found that everything stitched up really nicely. And so it really was great. You could go, you know, for example, I was hiking with it, and because it is so light, and the build quality, it's not going to set any kind of records. Going from a Zeiss lens to this makes you feel like you have a little tiny piece of plastic there. But, you know, it does the job, and that extreme lightweight, it's only 130 grams, means that I took the lens out of my backpack, or I should say the camera, this M3 body with the lens attached, out of my backpack at the top of the mountain, and started about a 3-hour hike. And I thought I'd probably throw it back in, and I didn't have a carabiner or anything to attach the hook to, but I found that it's so light that I really didn't mind the weight at all. And if I wanted to break kind of gripping it, I just put my finger through my little loop here and just let it dangle. But it was so light that I just kept it in my hands throughout the entire hike. And so you can quickly go from shooting macros to shooting landscapes to shooting a picture of someone. I was hiking with my wife at this particular time, so I would shoot pictures of her periodically. And so it's just a really flexible focal length, and so I enjoyed it in that sense. The one thing when it comes to focus is good. I did find that it's either the lens or probably the even more likely culprit is Canon still not quite their focus systems in its M bodies. But I found that sometimes at medium focus distance, say a portrait focus distance, that it would get distracted sometimes and focus on a busier background instead of the subject, even if I was putting the box right over their face. And so that was a little bit frustrating. I found that I had to magnify the image and kind of get it to refocus and redefine, and so I noticed kind of a trend of that. So that's one negative, and hopefully that's something that will be improved when Canon puts a better focus system in a future M body. The hybrid IS, this does have an image stabilizer, and it's Canon's hybrid IS, which it basically helps to stabilize on a couple of different types of movement, which makes it better for shooting handheld macro. Note that at very close macro distances, IS systems, all of them become a little bit less effective. That being said, I found that I was able to pretty successfully handhold this combination. In fact, that's what I've shot almost exclusively, and I've shot a lot of macro with that. If you want to get absolute best pinpoint macro results, tripod is always recommended. But the hybrid IS does a pretty good job, and I actually took this shot of, and I wanted to blur the water falling in this waterfall, and so I handheld a 0.6 of a second actual shutter speed, and I got a perfectly clear result. I didn't find that I could really go below that with a lot of success, but I was able to nail that on multiple occasions. I will note that this lens really resolves great shooting at landscape distances. It actually resolves great at all focus distances. I'm really impressed by the overall sharpness, but I was actually surprised by how well it rendered. I shot a lot of kind of grand scenes while I was traveling in Mont Tremblant with this, and I'll throw a link to an article I wrote about Mont Tremblant as a travel and photography destination down below. But I was really surprised by how well it did beyond kind of the initial range of focus in huge scenes where there's a lot of depth, how well it continued to resolve scenes or aspects of the image at ever deeper. And so images look really good big out of this lens, which is always a good thing for me. I was also impressed by the color rendition from the lens. For such an inexpensive lens, this is $299 in the US market, and you know, a small light plastic lens. You know, this is another plastic fantastic. The color rendition and the contrast are really excellent from the lens, and I was just really pleased with the look. You know, certain lenses produce a different kind of look or feel, and I was very happy with this. At some points it almost felt like I had been shooting with some Zeiss glass, which is one of the highest compliments I can give. My one complaint about the lens and the focal length, kind of the overall package when it comes to kind of a walk around or versatility in shooting, is that while it's not bad in terms of the depth of field at macro distances, you know, depth of field tends to be very shallow at close to macro distances anyway. But I find that kind of at close to medium distances, I would prefer a little more shallow depth of field. And so, you know, for example, if you were using the EFS 60mm f2.8 macro lens and shooting at a distance of 6 feet at f2.8, the depth of field would be 0.33 feet, which is, or only 10 centimeters. And so, you know, that's only about this close, and so you can shoot a nice kind of portrait and have a nicely shallow kind of blurring out of the background. At the same distance, 6 foot with this lens, your depth of field becomes 1.92 feet or 58 centimeters. And so as a result, the actual depth of field is 6 times more shallow with the EFS 60mm lens. And so I just found in the real world that played out with a lot of shots where I was kind of shooting to try to, you know, I like to shoot storytelling kind of shots, and so you want a certain something to kind of stand out from the background, that subject isolation. And I just found that unless I was really close to the subject, I didn't have as much control over depth of field as what I would like. And that's unfortunately the nature of the beast with a shorter, both a shorter focal length, but then also a not all that wide maximum aperture of f3.5. As far as the overall kind of aspects of image quality, the lens does vignette some, particularly at f3.5. It will clear up a little bit at f4. At f5.6, it starts to show a lot of real improvement with basically shading only in the very, very extreme corners, and I would say completely gone by f8. There isn't a profile yet available in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw when I was doing this review, and so I just had to plug in some values if I wanted to remove the vignette. It seems to have very good flare resistance. Contrast holds up very well, so no veiling that I saw. There's a little bit of ghosting that I did see, but it's not strongly pronounced, and it's not a kind of a long ghosting pattern. It's just kind of a localized flare point that would be more easy to remove in post if you wanted to do so. As I've already mentioned, the distortion is low overall, and of course the sharpness is high. And out of hundreds and hundreds of shots that I've shot in all kinds of different conditions, I've yet to see any kind of chromatic aberration at all. So I'm really impressed with the CA control from the lens. Canon did a great job with that, and that's really important when shooting with a macro lens. And so overall, image quality is great from this little lens, and it has a very pleasing form factor. You know, the overall ergonomics of the retractable zoom, there's aspects of that I'm not crazy about. It just makes it a little less intuitive if you're wanting to shoot on the fly. You know, if you happen to have a lens cap and you're wanting to get a shot, you've got to think about steps of turning on the camera, removing the lens cap, getting the lens into the shooting position and not going by the standard position. And so it's just a little bit more a clunky process than if you were to just, you know, turning the camera on and being ready to shoot. And so anyway, but that's the nature of the design. It does keep things wonderfully compact. So be just like all the other EFM lenses that Canon has produced. They've kept them small, they've kept them compact. You can put together a pretty versatile kit of lenses in a small amount of space with that. And that to me is really the great advantage, to be able to get awesome image quality out of a very light and compact. And for someone like myself who has a lot of other gear, that's really what I want this system for. I want it to be lightweight, to have for when I'm not wanting to carry big and heavy gear, to carry something light that I can still get great images. And that really, this lens, the EFM 28mm f3.5 macro IS STM, it delivers on that front. Great image quality and a very small form factor. And so if you're looking for a macro lens for your EOS M, M2, M3, M11 system, I have no problem recommending this lens. You know, there's a few little things that I've detailed that I'm not crazy about, but overall I'm very happy with what this lens can accomplish and how well it handles all the different things that it does, right down to including that 1.2 times maximum magnification, those built-in LED lights, which Just to answer one final question, I've had some people ask if you still have, if you're in the where you're only activating one side, do you still have both ranges of brightness? The answer is yes, you do. And so you click that switch, and so it switches first from intensity from the bright to the dim setting, and then it will switch sides at the bright setting to the dim setting there. And so a lot of versatility built into this little lens. So I really like what Canon has done in terms of bringing some innovation to a small package. If you haven't already followed me on social media, there's linkage down below, and if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. I'm Dustin Abbott. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.